All right, let me just make sure we're live. Okay, all right, we're live. Are we live? Yes, we're live. Okay, hey everyone. Happy Sunday. Thanks for coming in. Welcome to the session. I just want to say that as with every week in the series, I'm super honored to be with you in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty. And I look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together here today. Of course, this is our now what has become our weekly live sacred space session, free and open to the public. And we've been doing these sessions. This week is now our 38th week, our 38th live session. And the goal here is basically to create a safe space of reflection with the hope of creating a bit of sort of comfort in a time of uncertainty and sensitivity. And so today, for our time together in sacred space, we're going to do a couple things. The first is I'll go ahead and I'll set sacred space in the way that I've been doing every week during the series. We'll have our weekly talk about our topic of the week. And our topic for this week will be the Trickster Archetype, Part 2. Last week we had a fairy tale, which we took as like a sort of introduction to the Trickster Archetype. This week we have kind of this, we came back to the Trickster again, and now with this next fairy tale, we're going to go a couple levels, a little bit more deeply into the physics and nature of the Trickster. We'll have a bit of an exercise after that, and then that'll be it. We'll close sacred space from there. Let me just double check that everything's working. Okay. All right. Welcome in, everyone. So now we'll go ahead and we'll set our sacred space. So I'll begin by saying that this is a space where we intend to create time in a space together as a group, which is devoid of fear, threat, and control. In order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, within our own sovereign selves, and defined however you choose to define it. It could be a muse, intuition, just your gut feel, to that higher guidance from within our own selves. And in order to do that, we want to be in this safe sanctuary space for all of us to be able to relax and surrender with no danger or threat, so that we can partake of the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose that we all follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. Number 1 is confidentiality, standard Vegas rules. What happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now, because we're online, the feed is public, the replay will be public, we can't really do confidentiality, so we modify that for the online venue with anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to. You would come in from Facebook or wherever you're watching into the Crowdcast session feed. And then within Crowdcast, you can tinker with you can do an edit profile and then change your username to Donald Duck, Harry Potter, Mickey Mouse, whatever it is. And then under that username, you can participate, you can chat, you can ask questions, but you don't have to chat, you don't have to participate, you can just watch passively as well. So that's number 1, confidentiality / anonymization. Number 2 is this principle of, while we are in sacred space, there is no threat, there is no controlling of each other, there is no fixing, no interventions, no tough love for your own good, right? This will hurt me more than it hurts you. And the reason for that is, it's not to say that well-intentioned toughness or controlling or even threatening, right, is a bad thing. But because they are of the provenance of fear, threat, and control, right? I can threaten you with a good intention. I can say, if you go out and drive drunk, or I think you're about to go out and drive drunk, I will take away your car keys and arrest you, right? So that is a threat. It is a well-meaning threat. So there's nothing wrong with that, right? But because it is using the tools of threat, fear, and control, it is of the realm of the profane. It is of the realm of the profane. And the profane isn't bad. It's just the profane. We contrast that with the sacred. And the reason we come into the sacred is not necessarily because it's intrinsically better or worse, but because there are certain things you can do in the sacred that you can only do in the sacred, right? You can let your guard down in ways you can't do in the profane. So in this space, the principle is that there's no threat, no controlling, no fixing, no tough love. We are here to hold space for each other, to be actually however we are, right? To be afraid, to be anxious, to be happy and relaxed, to be afraid and anxious and feel terrible about that, feel incompetent that we feel afraid, or to feel righteous anger. Then why should I have to feel like so afraid and anxious all the time? To be happy and relaxed, and to feel guilty that we feel happy and relaxed, or to feel fantastic that we feel happy and relaxed. And however we find ourselves within this sacred space, this cut off space from the regular world. The word temple comes from the Greek word temenos, which is the Greek word for temple, but temen means to cut in Greek. So this is this space that is cut off in time and space for a couple hours only, right? Where we can just kind of let down and be ourselves, to kind of relax that muscle for a bit for no reason at all. Or you may find that when you go back out into the profane, when you need to tighten the muscle again, you're much more able to do it because you had this time where you could loosen it and flex it out. That's what the sacred space is for. So no threat, no controlling, no fixing, no tough love. Be how you are. No one will interfere with you. I will not interfere with you. So that's principle number 2. Principle number 3 is a corollary, which is that there is no commerce. No commerce, no recommendations. So nothing may be sold to you. I can't sell anything to you. Gary, my editor in Bangalore, certainly will not be selling anything to you. But also recommendations, where you say something, I'm feeling down about this, and someone says, well, there's this book that my cousin once read, and it fixed her right up. So maybe you should check out that book. However well-meaning that is, it's still a well-meaning, veiled kind of threat, because then the implication is, if I don't then investigate this book that you've so lovingly recommended, I may end up being, the dunderhead that loses out on my one chance at redemption and healing. And again, there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just we do that in the realm of the profane. We don't do it during these 2 hours of sacred space. So nothing may be sold or recommended or suggested. We are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide on a functional basis. Okay. And the third principle here is that there is no expectation of participation. So because there's no fear, threat, and control, there's no pressure to do anything, right? Again, the nourishment comes from the held space of your presence and attention, right? From what you are, not from what you do or provide. So you can chat, you don't have to chat. You can ask questions, you don't have to ask questions. You can come and go as you please. People will sometimes say in the chat, oh, I'm so sorry, I have to get the kids. And you're welcome to say that, but you don't have to. You can stay on, leave it on in the background, and be checking your phone, folding laundry. That's all right. That's all okay, right? This space is for you as a shared resource. It's like a standing buffet. Come and go as you please. Eat as little or as much as you would like. Come back and help cook if you want, but you don't have to do anything. It is here as a cornucopia offered to give comfort. Okay. And of course, we've said in past sessions, you can do this on your own through meditation, through going for a run, through having alone time and reflection. And that's, we highly recommend that if you want. But when we do these things in a group, the effect tends to be amplified. If there's a couple of hundred of us here, a couple of thousand of us here, it tends to create this feast of emotional and spiritual nourishment. That is way more than any single one of us could consume on our own in a lifetime, right? And the nature of these things is that the more you partake, the more you radiate this kind of like protectiveness for everyone else. So anyway, it's a wonderful thing. People have liked it. Gary and I have definitely been nourished by all of you participating as well. So it's just fantastic all around. So thank you. So anyway, those are the 4 principles of Presidian Sacred Space. This is what I propose. And as we step over the threshold into the temenos of this sacred space, if you are not okay with doing that together, that's okay. No fear, threat, or control. But we are, heads up, we are about to do that now. So we are going to pause here for just a moment to give you a chance to withdraw from the group. And no worries at all, we'll still catch up with you in the profane space, in the original video I share on explaining profane and sacred. We'll hang out by the goat vendor and have a latte. So all good, no worries. We'll still hang out still. But now is your time to choose if you would like to continue or not. So I will pause here for a moment and give everyone a chance to make their selection as to whether you would like to stay. Okay. And now for the rest of us, we will now move forward together into sacred space. And now as we move forward together into sacred space, I will just remind everyone of the 4 principles we would like to observe in the space: confidentiality/anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no fixing, no tough love, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. Welcome to Sacred Space. Happy Sunday. And thank you for being here. It's one of the best parts of my week, certainly. All right. So in this session, let's move on to our topic of the week. Let me pull up my notes here. Our session topic this week will be the Trickster Archetype Part 2. So in the last session, we did Trickster Archetype Introduction Part 1. And in this session, we didn't really have any plans. Gary and I, my editor in Bangalore, we do our weekly brainstorm call. In the last 2 months, the formula has been she will pull up a fairy tale that she's researched and brought up. She has a number of these, but she'll select one from her intuition, from her muse. She'll tell it. And usually my first reaction is, huh? I don't get that at all. As is the case with most fairy tales and dreams. And happenings in the real world, to be honest. And then we sat with it and we went into the story. We did some reading and we realized this is, the topic here was Trickster Part 2, giving us more detail about the physics and nature of this Trickster archetype. This time, the story she pulled was a Native American folktale from I don't know if we know the exact tribe, but it was from a collection of stories from the native tribes of North American Pacific Northwest. And the story about Raven, where 2 additional traits of the trickster are revealed and demonstrated. And we thought this was an interesting part 2 because these 2 traits, combined with the first 2 traits we kind of discussed in last week's session about the trickster, provide a powerful set of these 4 principles, these 4 traits now, where if we follow them, again, no pressure, only if you want, but just like as an FYI, it's this very tidy, very compact, powerful set of 4 principles now across these 2 sessions, where when you look at them, it is this almost roadmap, treasure map, operating manual for how to take guidance and nourishment from this life force called Trickster within us. So I think what we'll do is we'll start by telling the folktale. And Gary, if you're there, if you would come up on screen. So we'll follow the same formula as every week. Gary will tell us about the story, tell the story, and then I'll come back on screen and then we'll brainstorm and discuss it. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Artie. Hi, everyone.
What is going on here?
Yeah, it's kind of shuffling
There we
between.
are.
Right.
Sorry.
Hi.
Welcome, welcome. Happy Sunday. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Do you want to tell us about this story and how you came across it, or how it came to you?
Oh, because we were discussing Trickster last week, and I was kind of flipping through mythology collection, and it was just literally while I was flipping through that I came across a story that had Raven in it, and I said, wait a minute, like I had to pause because we've been discussing Trickster, and you'd mentioned how in different traditions Trickster was represented by different symbols and different characters, and Raven was a typical one from the Native American tradition, right? Mm-hmm. So when I came across Raven and saw Native American right below the title, I was like, okay, I'm going to pause here. And when I read that was so, in many ways, some of the motifs were so similar to the one that we'd already chosen for last week.
Yes.
That was really intriguing. So I thought maybe we could kind of build on what we were doing already. So that's how that came about. It's and the other thing that's interesting is it's also a kind of a creation myth about how the world came to be and all of that. So, the fascinating thing about that is that that the story is kind of talking about a time or a no time, which is like really, really old. So that's always fascinating. And what is it trying to say about a time where no time existed? It's kind of right at the beginning of time.
Yeah, was it a long time ago, or is it outside of time, which means it's now?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just very curious. So that's what I thought. Okay, let's dig into this.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to tell it?
Yeah. So
okay. Good.
Then.
All right. I will get off screen.
Yeah. So like I said, the story talks about the days before the world came to be what it is today, and nothing seemed like how it is now, and none of the rules of things were set down. So the world and
Gary, I can hear you, but I've lost your video.
Oh, is this better? Is this better? Can you see me now?
Nope.
Okay, let me try. What is this? Okay. Apparently Candice can see me.
Okay, so, keep going. I'll do a browser refresh on my side.
Okay, then. Yeah, so the story talks about a time when the world was very different. It wasn't what it is right now. Oh, great, fantastic. Thank you, Jean. And also, there were the rules that we have about the world today, that things are this way or that way, those rules weren't there. So the entire world was quite dark because, there was no light, there was just darkness, and everything was forever dark. And it was so dark that Raven couldn't even see to hunt. And he quickly grew tired of this because he kept flying into things and he kept tripping over things. And so, this will never do, he said. And then Raven listened. And he heard from where nobody knows that there was this one source of light, one bright golden ball. And a greedy old man had this ball, and he would not share it with anyone. So this will never do, said the Raven. And then he went in search of that old man. And finally, he came to the old man's cottage, and he waited outside, hiding, to see what he can learn from the place. And the old man had a young daughter. And when Raven realized this, what he did was, I mean, the quick-witted that he is, he came up with a plan. And immediately he said, "May I become a pine needle floating on water?" And when he said that, instantly, he became a pine needle and he started floating on water. And the next thing he said is, "May the old man's daughter have a great thirst, and may she drink me right down." And instantly, the old man's daughter was very thirsty, so she grabbed a cup and she took some water from the stream or rivulet. She gulped down all of the water, and along with the water, she drank down the pine needle, which was basically Raven disguised, right? And soon after that, as soon as she had done that, the belly of the young woman began to swell like she was pregnant. And the old man was furious. Who is the father? He wanted to know, I mean, what was going on. And the daughter cried and kept swearing that she'd never met a man, so she didn't know what was going on. And time passed, and this mystery wouldn't solve. But it was now time to give birth. And she gave birth to a really handsome baby boy. And the old man, her father, was so delighted with the child, with his new, grandson, that he actually forgot to be angry. And he was so happy that he wanted to fulfill every wish of this child. He was so happy that he actually didn't notice that this baby had very clever black eyes, just like the eyes of Raven, because, that was just Raven reborn. And one day, this baby, this boy, began to cry and began to wail, and he began to whine and shout and, beat his arms and legs on the ground, and all the tantrums that babies do. And he started shrieking at his grandfather, "Give me, give me." And the sound was just horrible because he wouldn't stop. And the old man had to literally put his hands over his ears and ask, "What do you want? What should I give you?" And the boy kept on going, "Give me, give me." And the grandfather thought, "Okay, what about this toy? What about that toy?" And he kept picking toys up from the ground and giving it to the baby, and he would just swat them all away. And the crying went on, the shrieking went on. And the old man didn't know what to do. So he said, "What do you want?" And finally, the boy said, "Golden ball," right? Because this is the moment he was waiting for. So he said, "Golden ball." And that is one thing that the old man didn't want to give. I said, "No." And of course, the shrieking went on, the crying went on, and the boy's voice just grew shriller. And finally, all right, the old man had to give up. He said, "Okay." He opened the wooden chest in which he kept this ball. And the moment he opened it, there was this lovely glow that spread all across. And he picked it up and gave it to the baby. He was quite cautious, and he said, "Okay, but be careful with it." And instantly the raven said, "Oh, I will." And suddenly he was bird Raven again, right? He grabbed that ball, got it in his talons, and he flew away. And this old man was just dismayed, and he said, "Come back," and that was it. So now Raven had a rival. And this was, the classic eagle. And in the earlier days, when there was no light, eagle couldn't find Raven. So everything was okay. But now, all at once, he could see Raven clearly, and this was easy. So he started flying after him, trying to catch him. And any other day, Raven would have just escaped easily. But now he was burdened with the weight of this golden ball that he was carrying. So Eagle could catch him easily if he wanted. And Raven was angry, said no, and he broke off a piece of the golden ball in anger and he hurled it into the sky. And that was how the sun was born. But Eagle still pursued Raven because he still could see him. And, Raven was still burdened by what was left of the golden ball. And he was frustrated that it was slowing him down. So he broke off another piece of the golden ball and he hurled it into the sky. And that's how the moon was born. And, there was still some left in his talons, so Eagle still pursued Raven, and Raven was still burdened by the weight. So finally he said, so be it. And he crumbled what was left of the golden ball, and he threw it, threw all these glittering pieces into the sky. He was finally lighter, so he could quickly escape. And now, in the sky, that's how the stars were born. So that's the story.
Yay! Good job. Thank you. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for selecting it.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'll start by asking my usual question every week, which is, so then where did you enter into that story?
The interesting thing for me was, it was kind of, because we'd done this reading before and because of what you told me, it was evident that, Raven was a trickster archetype. And also evident from the other things that we could see from the story, where his ability to change into things, right? And also the fact that just like in our previous story, last week's story, where the trickster would kind of hide and listen to what was going on inside the house. And then based on what he heard or saw, he would then kind of design a plan on, grabbing the thing that he wanted or, so it was that kind of motif was here in this story as well. So this hiding and listening and coming up with a plan was one of the most obvious kind of telltale things in the story. But what was more fascinating for me is, unlike the previous story, where, he just makes up a plan or just goes with the flow and things happen. Here in this story, he actually goes into this whole long transformation just to get that golden ball, right? He is willing to kind of enter this woman's womb and go through a birthing process and come out of it and, all of the tantrum and everything. It's a long plan. And I'm like, for a trickster, couldn't you find a shorter way to do this? Really, you had to go through the whole thing. So that was the part that was really intriguing for me.
I love that. Yeah. So there's just so much there. I think, should I go through some of my notes here?
Yeah.
Okay. So to me, well, first of all, for those of you who may be listening in for the first time for these kinds of fairy tale sessions, I'll give the usual just thumbnail of an introduction, which is the way we read. So at Preside, when we do healing and other things like this, when we read dreams, when we read myths, fairy tales, and often, when we read happenings that happen in the outer world, we use a certain technique. And the technique is basically that when you read a dream or a fairy tale like this, you regard every major actor in the dream or fairy tale as being representative of as being a symbol of a separate part of your own inner self. So the greedy old man is you, Raven is a different part of you, Eagle is a different part of you, The daughter of the divine goddess maiden is a different part of you. The golden ball is also a symbol of a different you. And then with that, you hit the play button on the video, you let the sort of story unspool, and you kind of keep an eye out as to who's doing what to whom. You have triangulation from other fairy stories as to like what the nature is. So Raven is like changing his shape, he's doing all these things, and we know from the previous Trickster story that was from a completely different, right, sort of Indian tradition, that gives you the pattern of like, there's this character behaving in this certain way, he must be an analog to the trickster we know. So then you continue watching him with this lens, and then more insight is revealed. That's one of the joys of reading myth and fairy tale across different, human cultural traditions, because these archetypes, they tend to not, there's two ways of reading it, right? One is to say, well, it starts from one place and then it diffuses through trade routes to other places. And that explains some of it, but it doesn't explain all of it. And then the other logic is to say, these archetypes appear in many different places, even though there's no proof of contact. But there's no magic. It's because what's in those other places are other humans. And the archetype of the trickster, the archetype of the mother and father, arises out of our biology. And that's why you have these cultural images on cave paintings and all pottery all over the place. And people are like, how did this idea jump from one place to another? And the other argument is it didn't. It's like, how did arms and legs appear over there, even though there was no trade route? It's like, it's because there are humans there. Wherever you find humans, you'll find arms and legs. Wherever you find birds, you are likely to find nests and eggs. It's not that the population of penguins taught the population of eagles how to lay eggs. Right? It's a part of being a bird. So here then, we have another story about Trickster from a completely different tradition. And the joy of this story is that it gives us, the way we've been reading from last week to this week, two additional aspects of the trickster to kind of reflect on and potentially even take guidance and nourishment from. So the two aspects of the trickster archetype we talked about in the previous story was number one, that the trickster is driven by appetite. And number two, part of his power comes from his power of voice. Power of voice. So if you're interested in that, go to last week and watch the replay. Now this story also talks about appetite. The reason Raven searches for light in the beginning of the story in the first place is because he's hungry and he wants to hunt, right? So he's hungry, he's driven by appetite. We also have the power of voice, which is when Raven says, there's no light, I can't hunt. And he says to himself out loud, this will never do. This will never do. In other words, he voices that this state of affairs is not okay, which then is the beginning of the process of healing. Right? And we talked about this in last week's story. His voicing was, find or fail, at least to have a square meal. So the voicing of his appetite. Here, it is the voicing of his, non-satisfaction of his appetite and saying, this is not okay. Right? And so the power of voicing, and there are many sessions in past sessions where we talked about, like the session where we did on the 7 chakras as a map of personal development. We talked about chakra 5, the Vishuddha chakra, the chakra blue in color of the throat, which is the chakra of like voicing your truth. And we talked about there, when we voice our truth, it's not just about telling your partner what you really feel. It's not just about telling your parents what you really feel or your boss how you really feel. It's also about telling with, ideally no fear, threat, or control, right? Which is why these things happen in sacred space that you're in a group or you create for yourself. Telling your own inner self, how do you actually feel, right? I know I should like this person and be attracted to this person, But in reality, I am not. And you're afraid of voicing that because, well, if you don't like him, I mean, he's like, captain of the football team, and handsome, and what's wrong with you? Right? That anyone would kill to be his partner. So you're afraid of all that. So you don't voice that truth even to your own inner self. Right? And then the trickster comes in and starts, changing the hinges on the door, sort of like painting windows shut and messing with your life to get you to wake up and see this. Okay. So he says out loud, this will never do. And this then is the crux of the beginning of healing, to ask the question, what is the matter here? Right? I'm depressed. I'm not sleeping well. I'm really frustrated. I'm already angry all the time. I always feel like I'm not good enough. I feel like everyone's always judging me. I feel like, I'm a dunderhead for not working harder during the pandemic, even though I need to stay indoors. Or I feel terrible that I'm not working hard enough during the pandemic, and I kind of like it. And I feel guilty about that, right? And so what is the matter here? Am I okay? Right? Why do I feel the way I feel? Why am I not sleeping? Why am I angry? And often we kind of know the answer, but we're afraid to voice it to ourselves. Because if we voice it to ourselves, it's one step closer to voicing it to the world around you, and then all kinds of stuff can break, right? You let that genie out of the bottle, who knows what will happen? And we stuff all that down. The beginning of the healing process is to ask the question, what actually is the matter here? Am I okay? And then you listen for the answer. And Raven, right here, just in the first couple lines of the story, says, there's no light, I'm hungry, I want to hunt. This will never do. This will never do, right? This will not do now. This will not do a year from now. It's like, oh, just hang on one more year, it'll be all right. This will never do. So it's a simple kind of throwaway statement, but nothing in these fairy tales is trivial in the sense. And then he stops and listens for the answer. So when you ask yourself, what is the matter here? Why am I angry? And you stop and you listen for the anger, for the reason. That is where healing starts to move and flow within you. An honest, truthful, more often than not painful, voicing to yourself is critical to transformation. So despite that, right, I will say that getting to this point of even asking the question, right? Raven asks right at the beginning. So every fairy tale, fairy story will tend to show like a zoomed in slice of the healing transformation process. And the permutations are infinite, right? So let's say, if the full process were the full life cycle of an acorn into an oak tree, right? Any given fairy story will zoom into like just the point where, for instance, the acorn will start to get moist and swell and start to explode and fear it's dying when it's actually in the middle of a transformation, but it's still dying. It's not that it's not dying, but there's more to come. Or right at the point where the ripe acorns are about to fall off the tree, and it's all terrifying. It's all terrifying. And so this fairy story doesn't zoom in on the lead up to Raven asking the question. Raven, I mean, by the time Trickster's here, you've already been in denial long enough. Trickster comes in and is trying to figure out how to like break into your house and like wake you up, right? There are other stories that zoom in to the lead up to asking the question. In the classic mythic cycle, Arthurian, Holy Grail, Knights of the Round Table, mythic cycle from Middle Christianity. This would be around 1100, probably 1100 AD. And then it was mainly set into writing in the poems that have survived to the current date. Probably like late 1100s, early 1200s, right? Like the Chrétien de Troyes version of Parsifal was like 1195. So in that story, in the Fisher King, the key question was that Parsifal had to go into the Grail Castle, see the king writhing in pain from his uncurable wound. And the prophecy was that he would walk in and he would ask, out of compassion, not knowing that this is what he was supposed to do, what ails the king? Right? What, again, the healing question, what is the matter here? Right? The king is a part of you, Parsifal is a part of you. And in that story, the first encounter with the king, Parsifal, fails. He fails to ask the question because he was trained by his mentor that a good knight who wants to follow career, get prestige, win a place in the round table of King Arthur's court, does not ask unnecessary questions. So he's there, he's watching this king writhe in pain. He wants to ask the question, but his training and his desire for ambition stuffs that question down and he fails. He's like out in the wilderness wandering, fighting dragons and saving damsels in distress for like 30 years before he gets his second chance. And the rule of that story was that you don't get a second chance, but he earned himself a second chance. And the beauty of that, the reason I bring that up is that in that story, which is the archetypal, classic, quintessential story of this question asking, the answer does not matter. I mean, you'll get an answer, but it doesn't even matter. The prophecy requires that you just ask the question for no good reason, and then, the king will rise, the crops will come back, and the citizens of the kingdom will be restored to prosperity. The key to healing the king is that the question is asked by an innocent fool, and even Parsifal fails in his first encounter. So here we kind of fast forward into a different part of the life cycle, where Raven basically says out loud, right out of the starting blocks, this will never do. And as a result, he goads himself into action. So appetite, Trickster, the first two things, appetite and voice. Appetite, check. Voice, check. Good. That's right at the beginning of the story. Then the story continues rolling on. There's more to this video as we hit play on it. And the beautiful thing that unspools here is that there are then two additional aspects of Trickster physics and dynamics that Raven proceeds to reveal and demonstrate as the rest of the story unfolds. And those two are, the first is receptivity and listening, right? So he says, this will never do. And then he stops. And then he listens. And when he listens, he hears. And the story says he listens and he hears from we don't know where. We don't know where. Right? This voice from nowhere, this higher guidance, this muse, this intuition. But he is in the sacred space where he's like not threatening, not fearing, he just voices. It's dark, I want to hunt, there's no sun, this will never do. This will never do. And then out of nowhere, the voice tells him, well, there's a golden ball, it's being sequestered by this old man, and here's where you go to find it. And he goes off on this adventure. Then when he gets to the hut of the old man, the first thing he does, this is just like the trickster in the previous story where he got to his father-in-law's house, and the first thing he does is like stop and listen through the window. And what he learns is that there's a daughter, and the old man he learns all the details by listening. So this power of listening, this power of passivity and receptivity, right? For those of you who are familiar with Taoism, which I talk about sometimes, it's a very Taoistic kind of frame of mind, where you are intentionally doing nothing and listening, right? And to an American, to a hot-blooded, red-blooded American who wants to do everything, move around, be a cowboy shooting everything, a classical Westerner, you look like you're lazy and you're not doing anything, but you're not, right? Not doing something is sometimes the right thing to do, and listening. Keats, the poet, right, I think called it negative capability, which is the power of doing nothing and waiting to see what happens. If you, like most modern people, are afflicted by this ailment of like needing to be busy all the time, right, to distract yourself. I always need to be doing something because if I'm not following my Western Puritan work ethic, and I'm being lazy, and I won't get in heaven. Right? It is very hard to not do anything. It is very hard to stop and just listen. So it is a power because it requires effort, right? You have to practice to actually do nothing and listen. And this is a key skill, superpower of the trickster, right? This is a key skill of any thief or trickster or con man, right? You wait to let your target talk out loud. People love to talk, and you just let them talk. And they tell you all the details, and now you know how to con them. You know how to break into their house. You wait until everyone's asleep, and then you make your move to burgle the house because you know which window they leave unlocked and all the rest of it. In the previous story, it is partly this failure of the servants, find and fail, right? Find and fail. They hear him say, find or fail, at least I had a square meal. And they immediately jump to the conclusion, right? Because they're find or fail. It's black and white, right? Thumbs up or thumbs down. There is no in between. Find and fail. It's right there in the story, in their names. So they will act consistently with their names in the story, where they will think it has to be one or the other. He must have found us or not found us, and he must have found us because he said this. And they assume that they were found. It is exactly this literal, and not to get into it, but I choose my words carefully when I say this. It is exactly this literal fundamentalist attitude of it has to be black or white, it has to be one or the other, that gets them into trouble, right? It's like, are you going or are you not going? It's like, well, it depends. No, you have to decide one or the other. And it's like, those are not the only two choices, right? The issue here is not whether we're going or not going. The issue is here you forcing the lens of find or fail on the situation, right? And in the find or fail story, the exact same thing happens. If they had more cunning, they would hear what the trickster said, and instead of freaking out and throwing themselves at his mercy, they would wait just another 5 minutes to be passive and receptive, and to hear what else he might say. And the next thing he thought, if they had allowed him to speak, was that find or fail, at least I have a square meal. And yeah, golly, I have no idea how I'm going to find those 3 pots of treasure. If they had waited just a hair longer, they would have gotten out of trouble. But of course, they can't wait a hair longer because they are find or fail. It's this part of you. So find or fail is a part of you, right? The trickster is a part of you. This part of you that always bumbles forward into the next, daring, heroic act, because it doesn't have the ability to be the opposite of heroic, which is chthonic, which is, to go underground, to sit still, to be depressed, to not force busyness all day long, to never wash, right? To never wash, to go into grief for 15 years in that previous story in the series. Okay. So it is this very peculiar thing where the trickster superpower is both the power of voice and the power of listening. It's this extraordinary, very elegant dichotomy. And the trickster has both, right? The trickster is, shall we say, the power to be find and fail. Find and fail, right? So the power of voice and the power of listening, to be not afraid to speak your truth to your own inner self, and to be not afraid to hear your own inner truth when you do speak it to yourself. Right? It's a very subtle art, it's a very subtle power of trickster. To ask the question, what ails the king? To ask the question, why am I angry? Why am I not able to sleep at night? Why do I have an ulcer all the time? Why do I hate, why do I have trouble getting out of bed every morning to go to work? To ask the question and then to be not afraid to hear your own answer back to this question. This is the essence of what leads you into transformation, willingly anyway. On the other hand, when you go into transformation unwillingly, right? You're kicking and screaming. You're like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to talk about it, right? Because when you stuff something down, what do you say, right? I don't want to talk about it. Silence, go to your room, right? We're not going to talk about it. This conversation is over, right? And why do you say this conversation is over? It's because you know what they're going to say and you don't want to hear it. You don't want to hear the question and you don't want to hear your own answer to the question. So the trickster is throwing boulders at you, putting you into scary accidents, making scary things happen on a CT scan or whatever, basically to try to loosen you up, right? And again, here we know because Trickster is a part of you. He's not the devil outside of you. He's within you. He is a life force within you. So when he does this, it is an act, very profoundly, an act of love, right? It's not punishment. It is transformation. It is goading you forward into transformation. And back in March, when we started this whole series, at the beginning of the pandemic, the title of the very first series was Transformation versus Punishment, which is this pandemic has happened. Is it punishment from the gods because we're not eco, because we don't have enough social justice in our society? You can read it like that, right? It's not invalid to read it in this profane punishment, fear, threat, and control way. But the alternative is to read everything, not just the pandemic, but everything in your life through the lens of transformation, right? Where there is a next life cycle that you're being pushed into that may involve pain in getting there, right? I mean, even childbirth is painful. Everything is painful, major transformations. And we're afraid of it and we're resisting it. And now we're getting various forms of a big push forward. Is this punishment or is it pushing you forward into transformation? The pain is the same. The pain is the same. Sorry, right? You don't get out of pain. But the suffering you take from the pain can be very different, right? So if I'm afraid of needles and I don't want a needle stick in my arm because it's painful, right? If some stranger comes up on the street and jabs me with a dirty needle, I start screaming. I'm terrified, right? But then if I'm looking for a vaccine, right, to save my life, right, and you have the last dose of the vaccine, I'll pay you $1 million for it. Like, come in, I'm begging you, I'm paying you to jab me. The pain is the same from both needle sticks, but the suffering is completely different because the framing is different, because the lens you're using to look at it is different. And so that's why, the first session of the pandemic and trying to give people comfort was to offer this duality of lenses of, like, you can look at it through the lens of punishment and you can look at it through the lens of transformation. I mean, we're still hoarding toilet paper and sanitizing and everything. The needle stick is still happening, but the lens through which you look at it is completely different. And here, seen through the lens of the trickster, then, to take this a little bit even further, let me just make sure everything's still working here. Okay. Is that, to me, the quality of this listening of the trickster is not this feeling of like, oh, the trickster is so spiritual and nurturing and empathetic, and, oh, let me listen to you, darling. What do you tell me all your troubles? I hold space for you. It's not quite, there's nothing wrong with that. But I just want to bring out this point that it's not about like being, a soft, nice, spiritual, new age person. But this listening of this trickster is a much more cunning and hardcore listening, right? It's more of the nature of listening for the guards patrolling, right, the bank, as you're looking for the right window of time to jump in and break into the bank vault, right? Just the right moment. So listening not as a form of ministering or nursing, although there's nothing wrong with that, but listening as a form of cunning wisdom, right? Not just in hunting, not just in daring bank vault, capers, but also in your own inner world, right? Right? Not the heroic slaying of the dragon and all the glory, but the chthonic, right? The world of darkness. And the story begins in the world of darkness. The key in the world of darkness, in the world of your own inner kingdom, the key is to listen, right? To not be busy all the time with, not manic, right? Not soothing, distracting yourself. Why are we busy all the time? It's because we can't sit alone by ourselves at home, because all these voices come in and tend to eat us alive and make us feel very uncomfortable. Typically because we've been taught to not listen. We've been taught to not go down into our own depths by ourselves or with each other. So, so by the time we're in middle life, we've spent a couple decades at least pushing it away. There's a big backlog of a tsunami trying to catch up with you, of forces within you that, if you had started talking to them when you were 15, no big deal, but now you're like 35, it's 20 years of backlog. And they're quite irritated to boot. So you fear them even more and you're running away from them, right? And when you do a process of healing, one of the key things is to scope out what's been happening and then to go in and start talking to people right down there, to be accepting of their voice, to allow them, because these are parts of you, to allow these parts of you to voice, and then to allow the rest of you to sit and listen. So to listen in this manner is hardcore, right? It's very difficult. And it's very difficult for any of us, for all of us. It's difficult for me, okay? To come to the raven in you, the trickster in you, and just sit and listen. To speak your own scary truth, right? To your own inner self. And then in response to this scary truth, to just sit and listen to your own scary truth being voiced to yourself. And then just to take it in. It's a very subtle art, right? I mean, it's very simple, but the pain and discomfort, let's say you were going to give yourself the vaccine, right? It's the simplest thing in the world to stick a needle in your own arm. But when you actually have to do it, it's like, and that's the kind of feeling, right? So when I describe this, I hope you will take this as like, oh, this is interesting. These are the physics. I'm almost describing the house, the bank vault to you, so you can decide how you want to break in, or whether you just don't even want to do this. You're like, I'm done. I'm just going to go, go back to my regular job, at the gas station. I don't want to break into this bank vault. But the point is, I'm giving this all to you in sacred space, not as so you better listen. I'm just like, here are the physics so you can understand and make your own decision. So that's the next thing that this story has brought us to. And then there's one final one. So the tally so far, if you're counting, from the first two stories was appetite and the power of voice. And in this story, we saw appetite and power of voice almost as an authentication of like, yes, this is a trickster story. And then we had a third, which is not just the power of appetite and acknowledging and accepting your appetite and the power of voice, but also the power of listening, And to these three, we add a fourth and final in these two stories anyway, which is the fourth is the willingness to proactively go into transformation. The willingness to proactively go into transformation. And this is illustrated in the story by the point at which the trickster, Raven, changes himself into a pine needle, actively wills himself to be swallowed by the divine feminine. And this is a terrifying state of affairs. Right? So for those of you who are somewhat familiar with Hindu mythic images, the god is drinking you down, right? Not into her reproductive tract, but into her digestive tract, where you will be burned by her acids. I mean, he's the trickster, so he crosses over into the other tract. But this goddess drinking you down is no different from the goddess Kali of Hindu mythic system, devouring the soldiers on the battlefield, or Arjuna and Krishna, and all of them kind of just popping like watermelon grapes in their mouths with blood, kind of coming down her lips and everything. So it is a terrifying reconsumption of the mother goddess of you. I mean, the earth is a mother, which means the earth is a goddess of birth and a goddess of death, right? The earth births you, right? If you're a human being, you were birthed by the earth. Aliens didn't drop you here, right? And even if they did, successive generations are birthed in the fertile soil of the earth. You are an earthling. But this same mother, right, then kills you, like a tiger eats you, a bullet hits you, and then your body goes down and is reabsorbed by the Mother Earth, right? And Kali is the face of the divine feminine in the Hindu system, at least, which kills you and takes you back in, but then you'll be rebirthed again, right? She is the mother from which you come, and she is the mother from which you return. So the trickster proactively pokes and provokes and triggers this thirst in her so that she takes him and devours him. He dies, right? He goes into her womb, which is a cauldron, a grail, a la the Fisher King, a cooking pot, where you are, like in the pandemic, as we said in the very first session, you are subjected to pressure and containment. When you go into the womb, when you go into the cooking pot, there is heat, pressure, and containment, right? So you're hot, you're uncomfortable, and you cannot escape. So this divine goddess is like the pandemic in this sense, drinking you down, subjecting you to containment and pressure. And this then transforms him into his new form, into this baby boy. And then he uses this power of his screeching voice once again to get the patriarchal, greedy sky god, this Yahweh-like sky god, who's hiding the sun, to relent and give him the ball. So this golden ball that's in contention here, this is exactly the same golden ball that is the symbol of the whole unified, healed inner self. This is the exact same ball as the ball in the Frog King story that we tell. So Gary, you may want to put up the links to Frog King and the links to, what is the other one I mentioned, the 7 chakras talk, in case people want to find them later. So the frog in the Frog King obviously is a trickster. He's the one doing the deal with the princess, right? And here we have the trickster, the raven, who is the raven / frog, going down into the well, right? So you are you're in darkness already, and then you go even deeper, right? So the divine goddess of the darkness, you're already in the darkness, and you go to the divine goddess of the darkness and let her drink you in. So you're in the darkness and you go down even deeper. Right, so you go down into the well, this raven frog goes down into the well in order to go through this transformation into becoming a boy, and then retrieving the golden ball. This golden ball is the same as the golden ball in the Frog King. It's the same as the 3 jars of gold in last week's story that the trickster also wins. The number 3 is significant. We won't sort of get too much into that, but in the last week's story, you had the 3 jars of gold. You had the 3 sort of transformations of the trickster that we had talked about in last week's story. And here, this golden ball, you're like, well, this golden ball is only one golden ball. But then you have similar physics where the golden ball gets transferred into the 3 forms of golden light, right? The sun, the moon, and the stars. So the sun, moon, and the stars are analogous to the 3 jars of gold. And here, this is a Pacific Northwest Native American tale, and the 3 jars of gold was from a Hindu tale. Very different. I mean, so did they talk to each other? Did they text? Did they email? Did they have like scholarly conferences? Or did these concepts, these archetypes, just arise out of the biology? And archetype, I mean, to be human itself is an archetype. And did these archetypes arise out of the archetype? Are they sub-archetypes, parts of the meta-archetype of being human? So this is also the ball, right? Just to kind of paint this picture a little bit. This golden ball is also the ball that in the Greek classic myth, kind of found creation myth really, of the Odyssey, right? In book 6 of the Odyssey, Nausicaa, right, the princess of the Phaeacians, I think, is down by the shore with her maidens playing with a ball. When somebody fumbles it, it rolls into the bushes, and Odysseus picks it up and emerges from the bushes, tattered and wearing rags. He's just been shipwrecked yet again by Poseidon. And he's basically this never wash frog. So the frog once again brings the ball back to Nausicaa, and they start their repartee, and he bargains himself into getting invited to the palace. Frog King, yet again, right? But not in Grimm's, not the trickster in Hindu myth, not the raven in Native American, Pacific Northwest myth, but here in Greek myth, right? In Mediterranean culture, the cradle of Western civilization. So Odysseus is the trickster, is the frog, is the raven, and is Neverwash. So what is this fourth superpower? This fourth superpower is really, how do I say this? You can think of this fourth superpower as the willingness to go down, right? This fourth superpower is the ability to, whether you even know, whether you've had an Artie to explain this to you, this is what's really happening, or not. Because I can explain it to you and you can still be terrified just fine, thank you very much. That's very nice explanation, Artie, and I'm still going to take a pass. And if you made that kind of a decision, congratulations, you are normal, okay? But the power of the trickster in you, this fourth power, is to say, yeah, we'll take that deal, do it. It's like, are you sure? Because if we do this, if you follow your appetite and you voice your truth and you listen to that truth that you voice, it could goad you into just pulling the pin on the grenade, throwing it, and letting the chips fall where it may. You sure you want to do that? And this fourth superpower of the trickster says, yeah, blow it. Do it. All right? Just, I'm done. We're doing this. We're doing this. Win, lose, or draw, let the chips fall where they may, we are doing this. That's the fourth superpower of the trickster. This calls to mind a poem, a poem that's just very dear to me. Very short one, by Antonio Machado. And I'll just read it, and then I'll say a few words about it, and then I'll give it to you again. And the poem by Machado is, mankind owns 4 things that are no good at sea: rudder, anchor, oars, and the fear of going down. That's it. So mankind owns 4 things that are no good at sea. So sea here, ocean, as we've said many times in the series, is the realm of insight, right? The realm where the whale comes up, the salmon, right, are a classic, even Christian and Celtic symbol of wisdom and insight. But also, you know, from the Bible, Jonah and the whale, the ocean is where the whale comes up, takes Jonah down into the belly of the beast of transformation, into the belly of the goddess as a pine needle, where you're transformed. And the sea is also the ocean of the tears of grief you cry when you are in crisis, when you are in transformation, and you are undergoing initiation. Neverwash, when he goes down for 15 years, he cries tears of grief. The salinity of the ocean actually matches human tears, I think, exactly. So when you look out over the ocean, you can think of yourself in this perspective as looking at an ocean of tears. So mankind owns 4 things that are no good on this ocean of tears and realm of insight and grief. Rudder, the desire to control your direction, to have some say in where you go on this ocean. I mean, it's the ocean. Who cares where you go? Anchor, the desire to be able to stop going with the flow, to resist the current, to say, I'm not going to go there. We're not talking about this. End of conversation. Anchor. Oars, the desire to brute force my way forward. When there's no current, there's no wind to power you through, right? Things are going well. Right, and you're like, no, I have to do the work. I have to do my emotional work. So you power through anyway. Or the oars can be, you know, powering on the ocean to like escape from the whale. So rudder, anchor, oars, and the fear of going down, the fear of transformation, and the death of what you think you are. in order to be birthed into what else you might become. But you don't get to know in advance, and you sure as hell don't get to pick. No rudder, no oars, no anchor. Mankind owns 4 things that are no good at sea: rudder, anchor, oars, and the fear of going down. Okay, so that's the 4th superpower of the trickster. Willingness to go down. But you don't know what's down there. You don't know what you're going to turn into on the other side. It's like, yeah, I get that. Let's go. The last part of the story here is Raven and Eagle. So Raven then, like the frog, successfully captures this golden ball and runs off. He is immediately beset by Eagle. Now, we talked about the rival of the trickster in last week's session, using the Greek mythic forms of Hermes and Apollo. Okay, so if Raven is, of course, Hermes, right, then we know that the eagle is Apollo. Apollo is the golden child, who's all about law and order, the straight and narrow, the tech bro, the hedge fund manager, right? He's not embodied. He fires his arrows from a distance. He's like, nonchalant. He's indifferent, up on the walls of Troy, plucking Achilles or Patroclus off the wall and not really getting into he's sort of this disembodied, nothing wrong with that, right? But he is of the intellect, of abstract concept, which is why I say things like tech bro, hedge fund manager. Definitely not the starving artist. Definitely not the empathetic social worker, right? Tell me everything about your feelings. The tech bro doesn't want to know. Just talk to the algorithm, right? Just talk to the algorithm, and my programs will deal with you. So what's fascinating to me about this detail of the story is that, of course, Eagle immediately attacks Raven, and he wants the light for himself. Actually, it's not even clear. Maybe he just wants to attack Raven, and now there happens to be light. And it is somehow this feeling that it is humiliating to Eagle that Raven is the one to retrieve the golden ball. There is an aspect of like unspoken dynamics of power here, right? Even in the Frog King, when we talk about the Frog King, one point I sometimes bring up is that, why does the princess do a deal with the frog to go down into the well to get her golden ball? I mean, her daddy is the king, right? The most powerful, Apollonic, right, sort of Zeus-like power of the realm. And yet she doesn't just go running back to daddy. So get your bulldozer, dig up the whole well, and find my golden ball back. And the reason, of course, is that implied in the story is that if she could do that, she would. Why would she even talk to this like frog, raven, homeless person, scary, street person? Why would she even talk to him unless she had to? And in that is the hidden implication that the frog, in this sense, is the most powerful actor, agent in the story, because he can do what even the king cannot, right? Even the king can't go down and get the golden ball. That's why she has to deal with the frog. And here, there's this similar kind of humiliation that Eagle attacks the Raven, but it's obvious that Raven is the only one who could have even gotten the golden ball. Right? Eagle doesn't say anything about that. Raven brings the light, and then Eagle, of course, uses the light to go after Raven. Can you imagine Eagle stopping and listening? Right? I mean, it's kind of one of these funny ironies of like these archetypal manifestations in our world in the present moment, where when I say eagle, we all think obviously America, right? The eagle is like the totem animal of the United States. So can you imagine Eagle stopping and actually listening? Can you imagine Eagle actually, voicing its truth to itself, right? Can you imagine Eagle actually being willing to be transformed? And transformed by the feminine, no less, and to submit itself to her. Obviously not. Raven is the only one who's willing to do these things, but then Eagle takes the bounty of Raven and immediately tries to commandeer it. Not to put too fine a point on it, but in some of these talks I will sometimes talk a little bit about racial dynamics in America. Our national bird is the eagle. When we sent men to the moon, it was the Apollo space missions, right? These things are not by accident. We sent our men into our Apollo spaceship in this, blatantly phallic Saturn V rocket to conquer the feminine moon, to conquer the stars and get closer to the sun, in an attempt to land on the moon, to plant our flag on her and claim her. And so in this case, if you extended this, imagine then if the first American man to land on the moon were not Neil Armstrong, but some black man. Imagine if it were like Muhammad Ali or James Baldwin, right? Or Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, who were the first American man to be sent to the moon. The black man, which I have said mythopoetically, is the frog of American society, the one we wrongly oppress and deny. But if you follow the symbol through, he is also the most powerful part of us, right? Because mythopoetically speaking, you can say by looking at these fairy tales and then basically, putting them not on the Greek, not on the Hindu, not on the Native American, but on the modern sort of Western American, European American society. The black man is the frog, which makes him a kind of trickster, which also makes him the only one who can get our golden ball back. I said as much in my sort of May talk in the middle of the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests. There is no redemption or reconciliation or next level of power for the American Republic without full reconciliation with our black fellow citizens and countrymen and countrywomen. So yeah, you can imagine if instead of Neil Armstrong, it were Malcolm X, who said, one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. It would be unthinkable. And if it did happen, if this raven did go in and be the first to capture, right, the golden ball of the moon, what would the rest of Eagle America do? It would do the same thing that Raven's doing here. This raven, this trickster child of darkness, gets the golden ball. Eagle can't get the ball. The king can't get the princess's ball back. And the exact same dynamics are shown here. Raven is the one who can get it back. He is honest about his appetite. He voices it. He's willing to listen to his inner voice, and he's not afraid of transformation. Eagle can't do any of these things because it's uncool. It's not macho. He's too proud for that. Right? Can you imagine John Wayne or Rambo being sensitive or emotional or even crying in public, going down into grief, never washing for 15 years? Totally unthinkable. It is, in fact, a part of the American myth that we don't go down, and that is, hand in glove with that being part of the American curse, right? Which we are all subject to, right? We all suffer under that. But it's also our path to healing, if we can find our way there. So Eagle, anyway, is understandably furious. So he chases Raven. It goes without saying that Raven can outfly Eagle, but he cannot outfly Eagle while at the same time holding the light of the entire universe. So he gives it up. He turns it into sun, moon, and all the stars. Basically, all light is brought by this Raven trickster action. All light in our world is brought by this action. Eagle versus Raven, right, seems to be, or then is propagandized into being this fight between light and the dark. But what this tale, this Native American tale, tells us, it tells us that it's the dark that gives birth to the light. Right? Raven is the one who got the golden ball back. And the form you see now, not a single golden ball, but a smaller chunk of the sun and the moon and the stars, is a result of the rivalry and attempt at restoring law and order, right, of Apollo and Eagle when Raven tries to finish his task. Now, another hidden point here, not to just sort of trash talk Eagle, right, is that Eagle is a part of you, Raven is a part of you, the golden ball is a part of you. It's all within you. And then it can be reflected in the dynamics of the outer world around you. But the point here is that the rivalry of Eagle and Raven is generative. Right? Eagle is not evil, but Raven isn't either. Right? Neither is bad. This is a diorama of how these two principles engage and dance together. This is the regime where we humans live and flourish, right? This is the sort of yin and yang that creates the generativity of our world, of our cultures across all the different traditions and civilizations. The sun, the moon, and the stars, it's not a tragedy. It is the way it is. Like, this is the setup that allowed us to flourish. We wouldn't want it any other way, right? But the origin story of how this came to be is a little bit messy. Is a little bit messy. All right, so it's 11:22. What I'll do is I'll summarize. I'll do a quick summary, and then and Gary, I'd love for you to come back up and share your thoughts as well for more discussion. So summary from last week to this week, we then have this grand set of the 4 key aspects of the trickster that we have come across. Number 1, appetite and being unapologetically led by it. Number 2, voice, the power of speaking truth to yourself without apology. I'm okay with this. I'm not okay with this. I'm okay with my life direction currently or not okay with it. Whatever the truth is, you voice it to yourself. Number 3, the power of listening to the answer you hear back. You stop and listen, and the answer comes to you. We don't know from where, but somehow the answer comes to you. And number 4, willingness to go into transformation without fear. When the answer comes to you, it's not that someone delivers the sun to you. It's that it is just a clue that then leads you forward into a further adventure into transformation and rebirth if you are willing. If you are willing, right? Not only willing, but in this case, cunning enough to actually engineer her swallowing you. She didn't, she wasn't planning. She wasn't thirsty in the beginning. And to be devoured by the feminine, not to conquer her, but to be transformed by her. That's why Trickster is a force within us. And you're like, well, this is terrifying. These 4 things are terrifying. And I'm like, absolutely. No human is entirely Trickster. Right? That would be way too much voltage going through any one human. It's beyond human to go into transformation willingly like that. For me personally, Gary would probably tell you the same. Every major transformation I have undergone, if I had the choice ahead to choose, I would have said, no, that's okay. I'll just take a 0. I'm fine. Right? I was tricked into it. I was lured by my own appetite into it. And this is how this happens. It's not a here's how you should be. It's like, this is a state of affairs that is so. Hi.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, additional thoughts?
Yeah, about the fear of going into transformation, right? I remember you mentioning in one of the other talks where you were talking about the trickster archetype, you said, probably the one aim and purpose and goal of the trickster archetype is to keep things moving, right? To kind of not have a status quo and not let things stagnate. So it's almost like another way of saying that, going into transformation is the key function. Like, this is just what a trickster does. Because going into transformation is about, making things move and change and not letting them be. So it's fascinating how it's essentially what shows up as a key feature of Trickster in most stories, where there's always a change of appearance, there's disguise, there's change of form, some kind of transformation that goes on all the time. So in order to push other things, push everything around into change, it's almost like the trickster himself leads the way and says, okay, now I change, and then and the whole thing around me changes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's just fascinating. And like I said, no one can be, so trickster completely, because that's just so much change to kind of embody as well as lead and have happen to you, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are other forces that naturally modulate trickster, right? If trickster went out of control, it would be like this an organ. Like if your liver grows to like half your body, then that's cancerous. It'll kill you. It's out of balance.
Yeah.
But typically we tend to overstuff trickster down, right? Everything's just the way we want it, and we're like, okay, that's it. All I want is the rest of my life with no more change, no more change. And that's just like, I mean, you can try for that. It's okay. But it's not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen. So it's almost like an acorn saying, like, I like being an acorn, no more change. And if there were no trickster function, and that state of affairs were allowed to happen, that would be the death of all oak trees and acorns. Therefore, right? The point of an acorn is to die and transform and turn into the next oak tree. The point of an oak tree is to like scatter acorns across, the green fertile earth. The thing that's anguishing for me as someone who helps people like find and follow their bliss is this idea of like, one of the reasons you make so many acorns is that not every acorn makes it in this generation. Not everyone's going to find their bliss. Not everyone is going to be able to sort of blossom the blessings that they were supposed to bring in their pickup truck when they arrived in this life, to rain down blessings on the rest of the world. And the way I comfort myself is that, well, even if you don't think you're doing your bliss, it's trickster, right? The blessings get out anyway. You do have impact on the people around you. That's a blessing. That's positive. I don't know if that's true. That's what I tell myself. Because I have to stay the sacred. When someone's like, this bliss program's too much, I need to take a break. I'm like, that's okay. Come back when you're ready. And I tell myself these stories that they found their bliss, I'm sure, with somebody else or on their own, or just they needed to circumambulate. Because otherwise I'd be panicked. I'd be like stalking them, going like, you have to find your bliss. And that would be a little bit too Apollonic, a little bit too law and order, a little bit too controlling. So even for me in my work of helping people with their bliss, these dynamics come up. It's hard. It's hard.
It's kind of scary to say. I mean, if I were to kind of indulge in that metaphor for a little longer, even if a seed were to end up in a bird's stomach, right, and not as a new tree, it's almost like that was the bliss line for that seed.
For that seed, yeah.
Yeah, to be food for another creature so that creature can grow and thrive. Yeah. I mean, that's a bliss path too. But then if you're going to tell that to that seed and say your job is to die, I mean, how are you going to
Right. Or some seeds get eaten and then get pooped out, and that's how they hitch a ride, right, with a squirrel or whatever.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not easy to predict bliss path. Is what I'm saying. Even if we wanted to tell people, like, okay, if you take step 1, 2, and 3, you're going to end up in this place. It's just so hard to do.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And whichever path they take, it's still probably bliss anyway. To go back to your first kind of guess and thought that you had that you weren't sure of. Yeah.
What else?
The other fascinating thing that while you were talking about voice that came to me was the fun thing about the story where this raven baby shrieks and wails and cries and almost kind of holds the grandfather ransom to give him the golden ball with all his shrieking and crying. That is, again, another aspect of the voice. But I don't know what you would say about how this voice comes out in the way of almost terrifying the granddad into giving away the golden ball.
Well, thank you for saying. I wasn't going to sort of go into that, but I mean, this greedy old man is basically this like hungry giant, right? He's like a Cyclops of the Odyssey, or the giant in Jack and the Beanstalk, right? Mm-hmm. And in a way, he's like the father-in-law figure in the previous Trickster story, where whatever comes up that is good, he wants to grab, control, hoard, hang on to.
Yeah,
he's almost like this Muladhara chakra, right? Mm-hmm. Where the Muladhara chakra is the red chakra at the base of the spine, and its impulse is to just exist, just to not die, just to survive. Right, the chakra above it is desire. The chakra above that is like will to power and competitiveness and ambition. We're not talking about any of that. We just want to grip and hang on, right? Yeah. And he's like a dragon, right? As is described in Western myth. In Chinese myth, a dragon is like this muse-like kind of divine figure. But in Western myth, the dragon is like this serpent lizard, which of course is chthonic. So we shit on everything that's the chthonic in our society. We fear it, we run away from it. But a dragon, as Joseph Campbell always used to famously say, is characterized by this gripping. And he would say jokingly, we know something about the zoology of dragons. We study them, and they live in caves, and they hoard and jealously guard two things: gold and beautiful maidens. Neither of which they can do anything with. A dragon can't do anything with gold, and he can't do anything with a beautiful maiden, but he just grips onto them anyway. And sometimes when he used to say this, he would crack a joke in the end. It's like, there are people like this in our world. We call them creeps. And so this giant is like a dragon. Right, yes. He's got the beautiful divine feminine, his daughter, and he's got the golden ball, and he's just gripping on to both of them. Yeah. And the way Trickster plays him is that he plays on his appetites. Right, he comes out as this golden child. Right, first he makes the divine goddess pregnant, and so he's worried about prestige and everything. Like who made you pregnant? And then the boy comes out, and he's this shining, gorgeous youth. And all of that falls away. And it's like, this is my progeny. This is my name. The family name will continue on, right? All this sort of, I'll have another brave who could be like the chief of the tribe now, right? And this is fantastic. And so it is because of the old man's appetite that he sequesters the golden ball. He wants all the light for himself, everything for me, all the glory for me. Yeah. But then also, the reason he ministers and wants to spoil the son is for his own appetite. Right? He's so proud. I have this grandson now. And it's this trick of the appetite that gets him to give Raven the golden ball. And then Raven goes off with it. Right? So it's all about, Raven is all about the manipulation of appetite to keep things moving forward. Yeah, that's the one thing I thought about it. Yeah. And one of the ways he does this is through his voice. But in this reverse manner, right? He himself is the lure. Yeah. To get him to like follow you. Yeah. And then the voice is the thing that like pounds you into like, going in the direction you want. It's like a worm on a hook.
Yeah. So on that note, what would you recommend that we do as an exercise with this story?
Exercise. Okay. Yeah. So let me scroll to my notes there. Okay. So so the exercise we came up with for this story is a kind of follow-on to last week. Okay. So as a continuation to last week's exercise, when you stop, and let me just remind of the 4 powers: appetite and unapologetically being led by it, voice the power of speaking truth to yourself without apology, then the power of listening to the answer you get back. Am I okay with the state of affairs in my job, in my health, in my relationship? And then you stop and you listen for the answer, right? And you know the real answer is coming to you when your first reaction is like, well, yes, that's obvious, but. Well, I couldn't do that. I mean, what would the neighbors think? It's like, okay, that's fine. I'm not saying you're going to do anything, but before we jump to like, we couldn't possibly do that, rewind a little bit. And it's like, what was the thing you said we couldn't possibly do? And just sit and listen to that. And then fourth, the willingness to go into transformation without fear. When you sit with this answer, it will be like, well, you know where the golden ball is. It's in that chest over there being guarded by a dragon. And you're like, oh, God. Really? It's like, well, you don't have to go, but if you want out, that's the only way forward. And you're like, God. And then you're led on to the next phase of the adventure. So then the exercise is, when you stop and ask yourself, am I okay? What ails the king? Am I okay? Stop and listen. And allow yourself to hear what answer comes back. Okay? And the way you would do this is you just find 5 or 10 minutes of alone time in your room, in the kitchen, or maybe you're in the car, you're driving to get groceries. When you park, before you go in or before you leave, sit in your car quietly with a notebook, pen and paper, and ask yourself, am I okay? And then after you ask that, stop, shut up, and just listen for what comes. And allow yourself to hear what answer comes back. That's the first step. Then step 2 is, the question to then ask is, given what answer I hear back when I ask that question, what transformation do I fear it will lead me into? Like, what was the big to-do about like not wanting to ask the question or even hear the answer? Well, if you follow this line of thinking, then you're going to do this and this and this. No, we're not deciding whether we're going to do it. I'm just asking, what is the this and this and this? What is the transformation that you are terrified it will lead you into? And then the last question, under what circumstances? Are there any circumstances? What would it take for you to actually be willing to move forward anyway? And I'm not pushing. I'm just asking, right? You're like, no, I couldn't possibly do that. But that would be the way you would get the thing you actually want in your life, which you're starting to suspect is the meaning and purpose of your life. Well, yeah, I suppose. And it would be to go in this direction, which would be terrifying because what would the neighbors think? Yeah, I suppose you're right. Now, without fear, threat, and controlling you to whip you forward, I'm not doing that. I'm just asking the next question, which is, so is there any scenario then where you would be comfortable moving forward anyway? What would it take? What would it take? And that's the exercise for today.
Brilliant.
No expectation of participation. Only if you want. Only if you want.
My experience personally for me, when I ask a question about, am I okay or what's going on, it's like I pause and listen, and then the answer is like, it'll take its time. It's like you asked, but you didn't say that you wanted to know this right away. So yeah, the answer's coming.
Well, that's your trickster. Your trickster is wise to your tricks, where it's like, if I tell her, she's going to shut it down for sure. So she's like, yeah, don't worry, just carry on. Everything will be fine.
I'm trying to tell you when you need to. Yeah.
All right, so that's the exercise.
Thanks. So get in the background. I'll let you close the session.
Okay, well, actually, one last thing. I just want to make a kind of housekeeping announcement or just question to ask. So you all, I think, have my email, our email, or you can just leave comments. You can message me and Facebook or leave comments. We'll pick them up. Is I want to ask your advice, the all of you who have been like watching these sessions and participating, which is, so here's the brainstorm we had, and I want to get your input and advice on this, which is the original intent of these sessions was to offer comfort in a time of, sort of uncertainty with the pandemic and everything. Now we're in like week 38, for crying out loud. And you can access the list of replays, but every single of these sessions is like 2 hours, 3 hours, some of them. So at 38 sessions, it's over 80 hours of content. It's just too much, right? And my concern is that how do we continue to deliver this comfort to people? I mean, even the sessions that I've already had, depending on like how it gets shared, whether you share or not, I mean, no pressure, right? But some sessions are seen by a couple thousand people. Other sessions are seen by, in some cases, a couple 100,000 people, depending on how things are shared. Probably depending on how concise I am. But the point is, I'm trying to figure out, even in this session, I'm referring to sessions that were months ago. And a lot more people are joining these sessions, and they haven't watched, they don't have time to watch 80 hours of stuff to even get like the inside baseball sort of references I'm making. So I'm a little bit worried about that because as fun as these sessions are, I want to make sure we're able to package them in a way where the comfort is more portable and atomized, so people can like, we can achieve the goal, which is like actually giving people comfort. So we've been thinking about different ways, like making maybe a book of essays, where it's just a book of short essays. Each one is like the pearls of wisdom from each session, so you don't have to listen to the whole session. So anyway, we're brainstorming, and so number one, would love to get your ideas on how to get this out to more people in a more atomized, accessible manner. Number two, so is it a book of essays? Is it themed around pandemic relief, or is it themed in a more broad, more sort of timeless manner? Would it be volume 1, volume 2? We're just noodling on what the form factor might be, and just getting your ideas on just brainstorming, seeing if your muses come to you with things, please tell us. That's number one. And number two is a more general question of like, what even are the most comforting things you've gotten from live sacred space? If you were to sort of distill 3 or 4 pearls of wisdom that you would then put in a space capsule to send off to another planet to like tell them, okay, if you don't have time to watch all 80 hours and growing, right? Here's basically the 3 or 4 things that this guy talks about, and if you know that, you've basically got, the gist of it. What would those be? Right? What would those be? Because as we expand to a larger audience, right, the number of people who are going to have the appetite, and this is why I'm making this announcement at the end, like all of you here are like the diehards, whom I love, right, are my fellow healing and bliss nerds. But we're going to need to like shrink it down to like sound bites, and we'll lose a lot in the process. But what are the most comforting nuggets you've gotten from this? If we only had 30 seconds to tell everyone like what you gained from it, what would we pack into those 30 seconds? So anyway, send us email, and we'd just love to get your thoughts on that. And thank you so much for coming with us on this journey. It's been super fun for me. Gary, I know you feel the same, and just super nourishing and comforting as well. So thank you. Thank you. Gary, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it doesn't feel like 38 weeks, but now that you mention it, like 80 hours of content, of all of these various topics. We've repeated a few, but there's been a lot of fresh content in all of these talks. So it is quite a lot of stuff to kind of understand and assimilate at once, right? Or even in a period of time.
Yeah, even in this series, I mean, we've had sort of anguished is too strong a word, but we've had these questions we've been torn about, like, do we do another session on grief? Do we do another session on circumambulation? It's like the session where we talk all about that is of the official record. You can go back and listen to it, but do we talk about it again anyway, right? So I don't know. Would love to hear everyone's thoughts on that.
Yeah.
All right. Should we close the session?
Yeah. So again,
Okay.
just back.
Let me. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close the session. I'm going to put the link to next week's Crowdcast session in the chat. You have that. Our next session is next Sunday. It's free, open to the public. Please invite others. If you're on Facebook, would love for you to share, obviously only if you want, this live. I don't even know how you do that, but if you spread the word on social, that would be great. And then, so that's next Sunday. You have the links to join. And so now I'll go ahead and close this session. So I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for sharing this space with me and us, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great weekend, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you. Thank you.